Okay, the subject today was really all the sort of multi-photo options. Uh, so if we look at the top right corner, files, there's a couple of different ones here. There's Panorama, Stack, HDR Merge, and Focus Merge. They're the ones we're going to look at this evening. Um, we'll give the astrophotography stack a skip. Um, it's a lot more complicated and a lot more to it. Unless you're actually into it, steer clear. Right. What I've done is I've got some of my own photos, and the first one I'm going to do is the HDR, and hopefully you can see those three raw files. I'll just make it a bit bigger. There we go. And this was at sunset. So to get the stones, the white stones to show up meant that the sky got very washed out. The sun's a bit bright. Yeah. Why has it stopped showing the photo? Yeah, something odd there. There we go. So, right. So I've got three exposures here. Now you can either, so this is the part you have to do in the camera. So you can either use bracketing and automatically take three or five exposures, seven in some cases on some cameras, and automatically bracket all the um, photos and get a different amount of exposure. And all the bracketing does is it changes the time the photo's being exposed. So generally speaking, what will happen is let me just look at this. Right. So normally that would be the one, that's the one I've picked. And then there's one which is darker and one which is lighter. But you end up with three items in this particular case. Now, you can either use bracketing or you can just do it manually. And I think in this case, I did it manually. So I literally look at the histogram on the back of the camera and make sure that nothing's being clipped in the highlights, and then adjust it so that nothing's being clipped in the um, dark area, and picking one in middle exposure. Because basically the dynamic range at that time of night, it was just too wide for one shot. So that's why you would do a HDR merge. Now sometimes HDR has got a bit of a bad rep at some point because basically a lot of people were overusing it, oversaturating, and generally making them look quite bad. But it can be a very good technique, and I use it a fair amount of the time. So what I'm going to do is file new HDR merge. We're going to add the files in. So if I go to, I think that's the third one. Yeah. What I do is I just pick all three photos, select them. Now you've got some options here. Generally, you just go with the automatic and just hit OK. But just to explain, it will automatically align the images. Now that can be very useful. If you've got your camera on a tripod, you could argue that you don't need to do that. I quite often um, do bracketed shots handheld. So there will be a slight, if you're doing handheld and three shots, you will move slightly. So you always want it to, in my case, want it to align. And then when you align, you've got perspective or scale, rotate, translate. Again, I normally go for perspective. It seems to do a good job. Automatically remove ghosts. That's where you might do a bracketed shot, say in a high street, and you've got people moving in and out of the shot, or you might have a tree branch moving because of a breeze or something like that. So it will try and automatically remove ghost images from those shots. Um, I can't remember the last time I tried to use it, so I can't attest to how good it is, but it does attempt to remove ghosting from. So, i.e., if something appears in one image and not the other two, it will try and remove that from that one image. Noise reduction. I always turn it on, seems to do a good job, and I leave it at the default of 40, but feel free to experiment. And at the end, I want it to go into the tone mapping, and you'll see why. But again, it is optional. Right, I'll press the button, and it'll have a little think, and it'll grab all three photos. And what it's trying to do is use the information from each image that isn't going out of the dynamic range. So it's trying to pull everything in so that you get a composite photo where everything, nothing's underexposed and nothing's overexposed. So what it does is it takes you into this default persona called tone mapping. And you've got some presets on your left, and you've got your tools on the right. And you've got the obviously image in the middle. So if we go through the presets first, so if I click on detailed, if I click on that, you see all the details slightly jump out. If I go back, if you look at the clouds, and now if you look at the rocks in the foreground, you can see a bit more detail coming in, a little bit more sharpness. I quite often use this one, but there are other defaults. There's cool black and white, high contrast, and dramatic. Now there are up the top here. That's the default ones. There are more. You've got extreme and crazy, and I've got an additional one I downloaded. So you could go to crazy. There you go, and you can do some really weird stuff. You know, sort of like nuclear winter. Generally, I don't use these. Um, so if I go back up to default and go to natural again, what it's doing is it's adjusting these sliders here automatically for you. So if you look to the right and just watch what happens, when I click on detailed, the local contrast goes from nothing to what, a third, well, 40%, moves it up to 40%. If I manually move it, you can see it gets more crunchy, if that's a word, the more I move it up. And I would say 40 is not a bad level. If you take it up too far, it can look over crunched and it looks like it's been processed quite heavily. Particularly you look at the clouds at the top, it gets to the point where you think, is that believable? So I think 40 is quite a nice number, which is the default. If I just click that, it should, if I click backwards and forwards, it'll go back. Tone compression. Basically, it's taking the tones and pushing them together. And that um, is helping to bring all the under and overexposed areas into your photo. You've then just got basic changes as if you were doing a normal raw conversion. So exposure, black point, brightness, contrast, saturation, vibrance, etc. But you can play around with those as well. And obviously these presets are adjusting. So if I pick this bottom one, you can see the saturation leapt up. So you can have a play. That's the nice thing. And then once you've picked one that you like, then you can manually tweak it a little bit more if you want to. So if I compare that to the actual images themselves, if I try and get both of them on the screen at the same time, um, you can see that this one here, the sun's nice. Foreground is basically very, very underexposed. In this one, the rocks are quite nice, but the sun is overexposed. And in the third one, yeah, the rocks are the right exposure, but the sky and the water at the back is completely overexposed. So what it's trying to do, you'll see the front looks like the totally overexposed one for the sky, but the sky looks like the darker one. So it's bringing them in together almost seamlessly. So it's nice effect. And what I tend to do is if I'm out and about, if it's a particularly bright, contrasty day, that's when I'll start bracketing. And that way I don't need to worry, particularly if I'm handheld, um, running around taking photos. Although I don't do much running these days, walking around taking photos. You don't have to nail the exposure and check everything. You can just do a bracketed shot, and if it doesn't quite work out, you've got the under and overexposed ones, and you can either pick one of those or you can use the HDR merge. What I'll do now is I'll hit apply. Okay, and it takes it in, and you're ready to start editing. So what it's done is you've got a much better balanced exposed image, but that doesn't mean you need to stop. You can now start doing your own thing. So, we can now start looking at the levels. You can see everything's in here now. It's all spread out. So I might darken it a bit, maybe. But I think I probably wouldn't bother doing that. What I'd probably do is do a more localized, maybe pick let's just do this. Let's say I want to darken the foreground a little bit. Um, I could take the brightness and I could just drop it a little bit. Actually, that looks more sunsetty, doesn't it? And you can just, as you would. That's nicer. There we go. So I've upped the brightness and, sorry, brought the brightness down and up the contrast a bit. And I think that's quite a nice image there. And you do your normal adjustments. So that's the use of HDR. So you can make your pictures oversaturated and gauzy, but you don't have to. Personal choice. That's how you do a HDR. Let me get rid of that and get my. Okay. Um, right, there's a similar one. Let's see what the other one is. I can't remember now. Right, it's both. Yeah. Okay. So I'll do this one as well. just for the hell of it. This was HDR2. So just to repeat, file, new HDR merge, add the images. I'm going for default, hit OK. Oh, did I pick the right folder? No, I didn't. Okay, I'll throw that away. Cancel that. How did I manage that? Okay. Yeah, no, two. Yeah, all right. That's better. Open that. So HDR doesn't solve everything. This particular day at Dungeness, the sky was absolutely cloudless. So there was no feature in the sky at all. And with a HDR, if you've got a nice cloudy sky, you can get some really nice dramatic effects on clouds. But if you've got no clouds, you're stuffed. So here again, that's the default. It was a very bright day. That's why I did a HDR. But again, if I pull up the detail, I think that is a bit like it's like sharpening, basically. And then you can just play around. Um, so that's probably a little bit too much. Um, Let me bring the brightness down maybe a touch. The black point. The black point was actually okay. Okay. And then when you're happy with this, play around, hit the apply button again, and off you go. That's your initial photo. You've only got one layer. It's merged it all automatically. And you would just start editing as if you were just bringing in the raw file in the first place. It gives you a much better starting point, when it's a high contrast day. Okay, let's look at something else. Um, let's look at focus stacking. Now, what we've got here, this is just a sample I had. There's a couple of areas where it's quite common to use focus stacking. One is in the macro photography, where you're very magnified and your depth of field is very, very shallow. You're talking maybe in some cases, a millimeter or less. You have to take a series of photos. Yeah, unless that's what you actually want is one tiny part of the photo in focus and the rest is very soft or out of focus. And the other is well, there's many uses, but the most common one would be um, landscape photography, where you're taking a photo of, for example, a distant mountain range, but you've got a foreground interest quite close to the camera, and you want your foreground in focus, and you also want your background in focus, and potentially midground as well. And the way to do that is definitely use a tripod. And that's basically get your composition, then focus on your foreground, take a photo, focus on your midground, take a photo, and then focus on the mountains at the back or whatever the scenery is and take another one. You might need to take more than that, but quite mostly you'll probably get away with three. And you can then stack those images if you want a landscape photo that's sharp front to back. you know, which is nice. Uh, from an aesthetic point of view, you might not want that. You might want the background going out of focus. You know, it depends on what your composition is. But if you want it front to back sharp, the best way is to take three, four, five, however many you need images and stack the focal point. Hence, it's called focus stacking. So if we look at these images here, there's a whole stack of them. And as I move down the image, you'll see the focus changing. It's moving. If I do that again, it's probably, yeah, it's reloaded it now. So you can see the focus changing. And what we want to do is combine those photos to get a much sharper area. You can see that each individual photo probably only has a focal sharpness of probably less than a millimeter. You think that that's a pen, a pen, ballpoint pen, and a very, I don't know where the spring came from, but um, well, I think it was the spring from inside the pen. So if I just run that through that again, I honestly can't remember what the color light. I think there's various light areas. There's red, there's green, there's blue. I think there was some fairy lights in the background just used, which gave all this bokeh type balls in the front. Um, so that's what we are trying to do there. So what do we do in Affinity? We go to File, and this time we're doing a focus merge. I'm going to add our files. So if I go up, focus stack, and basically I'll grab all of them. So however many you need to complete the job. There's no special options. You just hit OK, and that will start processing. And it does quite an interesting. You can see what it's trying to do. So it's basically going through each photo and trying to find the sharp points on the image and keep those bits and discard the um, other parts of the photo and basically keep the sharp bit from each one of those photos and pull them together. And that's what it's doing right now. Okay. So what we've got now is most of it is now in focus. Obviously, the further distances further away are still out of focus because the stack didn't focus that far back. But now we've got a much better image where the pen and the spring look totally in focus, but the items much further away are still out of focus. And it's as simple as that. So a lot of cameras now have a focus stacking feature in them. I know my Canon R7 does. I think the R5 does. Certainly the R5 Mark II. I'm pretty sure Fuji cameras have this feature. I can't attest for other models, but yeah, if it's a fairly modern camera, I'm sure it's probably got the feature where you can actually set this up and tell it, how dense you want the focus to be, and basically the camera will go off and take a whole bunch of frames and shift the focus for you automatically. You can then take those photos and then use Affinity to do it. There are other programs that do it. Some of them are available. I'm pretty sure the Canon, you can do it in camera, but it gives you a JPEG. Whereas what you might actually want is the raw files. Do it here in RAW so that you can further edit. I prefer to do it that way. There are other dedicated pieces of software I used to use. one. Can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but it would actually talk to the camera, and actually the camera would refocus, and it was quite clever. Um, but less necessary these days because the cameras now have got that type of technology built in. So that's what you can do with that. So you end up with a full stack once you're complete. If you don't want to muck around with this, you can take ones out. You can so you can remove ones if you want to. What would be a good example? Yeah, you might not. You might want the focus to fall off near the back end. So you might decide that the last two frames weren't necessary and you can remove them. So you might come down here and say, okay, I don't need that, and you can delete it. But generally speaking, you know what images you want. What I would suggest is once you've done that, um, I would rasterize and trim. So now and then just duplicate it. So that should just be a straight image now, and I can delete that. I don't need the stack anymore. But basically, you want to get rid of the stack because that's an awful lot of data. So you're probably better once you're happy with it, get rid of the stack. You can always recreate it if you want to. And again, you're now at a position where you can just edit as you would normally edit. You know, all of these techniques today is just a means of getting a better base photo to start your edits on to begin with. So now we've got this um, merged photo with a much better depth of field within the image, and you wouldn't know that necessarily. So another reason, trying to think of reasons why you do this. Okay, if you're taking like a macro image, what you might want to do, what you could do is really crank up the f-stop and give yourself a much deeper depth of field. But the problem is when you go up to like 32, numbers like that, um, it's not the sharpest point in your camera's focus. Normally, it's around f8 to f11. Your lens is the sharpest at that point, so you might want to stay within that range, which means your depth of field is quite shallow. Or you might deliberately want to make sure that and this was true in this case, I didn't want to have almost infinite depth of field because I did want the bokeh effect in the background. So I wanted the bokeh effect, um, but that meant that the depth of field was short, very tight. Therefore, I had to take a number of images to make sure that the subject of the image, the pen and the spring, were all sharp. So you're playing that balancing game. That's what you need to do camera wise. But once you've got those photos, you can use Affinity to merge them together. Okay. That's that done. Hopefully that all makes sense. Right, if we go back up a level. Uh, Panorama. That's probably the most used. So again, this one I was taking the mic. Um, Basically, I was at the top of the mountain, looking down into some valleys, and you've got like an inverted cloud. And if I generally, when you're taking a pano, I did this handheld. I didn't have a tripod with me. That would be normally preferable, but it's not essential. As long as hold your camera, uh, put the camera in manual mode because what you don't want, and you can see the sun is pointing at the this first image. I've got the sun at the top. As I pan round, if I didn't have it in manual, the camera would keep adjusting the exposure. You need it in manual so that your exposure doesn't keep changing um, by your auto settings, whatever that may be. So always make sure that it's manual. And as you take the photo, always make sure you've got an overlap. So if I go down this list, so if I go back, you can see I've probably gone half a frame. Let me just do it once because it takes a second to load. And then if I go back up to the top, it should be quicker. Right. But I'm panning around the valleys there. Okay, and probably a little bit too far. So I've got a barrier in the way there. But if I go back up, you can see I'm moving about half a frame. You should try and aim for at least a third overlap, and it gives the software a much better chance of aligning the images together. If you make it too, if you don't give it enough room, the stitching might not be as good as it could be. So what we want to do now is take those images and um, pull them all in to one nice panorama. So this is how you do it. File again, and you got this top one, new panorama. And what we'll do is we'll add to get panorama and pick all of them. This is a bit extreme, the number I went for. um, quite often the panorama may only be 2, 3, 4. You'll see how wide this is. It gets a bit overly overly done, really. Uh, no real options here. You just got the option stitch it. So it'll go and process for a moment, and it will show you the panorama as a thumbnail. Okay, so this is our panorama. I'll hit OK. It'll load that up. But what you'll see, particularly because I was handheld taking this, it's lined the images up. Of course, it means that each one I must have. It looks like I've gone down a little bit and then back up again as I turned. So there's a little bit of a dip. So what we need to do is trim this up. So again, we're in a little app of Affinity. What I'll do is generally all I do is the trimming in here. So I've got a bit of the barrier here, so I'll get rid of that. I want a little bit of the sun, so I'm going to accept that I've got a little bit of filling in to do here. And I'll bring this over, and again I'll try and sort that barrier out separately. So let's just move that back a bit. There we got, yeah, that'll do. Okay, so I'm fairly happy with that. And what I'll do is I'll hit apply. And it'll just take you back. And again, it's just like you're starting to edit a new photo. So first thing I'll do is fill in. Now, hopefully from the other week, you've all got your own in-paint edges macro. So I'll just click the in-paint edges. And obviously this is a big file now. And that's probably something else worth considering is each photo was 30 megabytes. I had, what, 7, 8 of them. So physically, it's a big file. So you might want to consider um, trimming or reducing it in some vein. So if I come here, what I'll do is I'll create another pixel there on top. I'll pick my in painting brush and make sure I've got current layer and below picked. And let's just try and get rid of this bit of barrier here. There we go. I've done quite a nice job. And there we go. We've got a nice panorama there. Um, and you would now just continue editing as if you would normally. So that's the cruise ship we came in on. That's how high up we are. That's the cruise ship. So it gives you an idea of scale. But for instance, there's a little bit of noise there, artifact noise. So what I would do is uh, denoise and probably just bring up the color noise a bit. Bring up the luminance. Sorry, I'm on the wrong photo. That doesn't help. Let me Control Z that. No, pick the actual photo. Always helps. Denoise. Just get an idea there. Right, it's yeah, moved it out. But this is the trouble. If you smooth it out, you also lose sharpness. So you want to do it, but do it as little as possible. Because we are zoomed up quite high there. So, how much real benefit I got there or not. Yeah, I'm fairly happy with that. And what else would I do? Might increase the vibrance. If I just come in here again, might just want to update. Just increase the saturation slightly. Maybe increase the vibrance a bit. And if I turn that on and off, so it's fairly subtle. Nothing too much. It's brought out the color a little bit. And finally, I might use curves to just give it a little bit of an S. Not too much. I don't want to darken it too much. It's probably enough. Oh, just move that up and that one down. I think that's probably enough. Off, on, just slightly, just subtly. There we go. And there we go. We've got a nice panorama. Um, give you an idea how wide that is. If I pick my crop tool, and if I go to here, which is that 16 by 9 would be considered a widescreen type level. So we've got that and that again, both sides, basically. That's how wide this one is. So I'd say printing wise, you might want that on the wall at home. You wouldn't want it in a competition that wide because it would look so letterbox. The width would be restrictive, making the height look very thin. So just if you're thinking from club competition point of view, that's probably too much of a letterbox. But as a standalone photo, I think it's I like it. Um, so okay, so that's panoramas, fairly straightforward. Um, the hard bit is in the photography side. It's actually taking a consistent number of photos. Just to reiterate, always make sure you're in manual. Wherever you start, you're going to go from left to right or right to left. Doesn't really matter. Um, but if you're not using tripod, you've got to make sure it's definitely level so that you're not on the tilt. So as you pan, you're tilting downwards. Try to avoid that. Most tripods have a spirit level on them. If you're handheld, basically brace yourself quite well and try and just turn from the hips. That tends to work for me. So I tend to wind myself up, start taking, then you come to like halfway where you're just normal, and then you can carry on around to the side and just brace yourself and do all the movement from your hips. Um, then you can go out and strictly come dancing as well. Uh, yeah, so the actual, from the software point of view, it's dead easy. It's just stick to this, just add all of these together, and then just some, your normal editing. Okay, let me just go back to my folder. Yeah, I just got one last thing to look at, which is a stack. This wasn't too successful, but I'll show you anyway. Let me just. So, what you can do is you can simulate a long exposure. So, for instance, you can see these photos are all consecutive, and you can see the fountain uh, just going through there. Now, if I haven't got a tripod with me, I can't really do a long exposure um, because I just can't hold it still long enough. So in that case, what I can do is just, instead of doing a long exposure, is do a number of exposures. So if you wanted a 4 second exposure, but you're doing it manually, what you might do is do 8 half-second exposures or 16 quarter of a second exposures, and that way you can sort of emulate it. So if we go back to Affinity, and what we can do now is just pick a new stack. Now, if I had the photos in uh, stack, so it's not a focus stack. It's not a. It's just basically taking a bunch of photos and sort of emulating a long exposure. Um, just add the photos in. Don't think we need the live. Perspective is normal. And again, it will just go off and process this. The only indication you tend to have is this bit up here, loading one document. You'll keep saying that. So it's having a little think about it. There we go. So what you'll see is hopefully that's a bit smoother. And I was saying it wasn't this wasn't a brilliant job to be honest. Um, but you can see individually it's sort of merged them together. So if I click on the little arrow at the side, here's all the individual images. And if I turn those, no, turn the stack off. Oh no, stack needs to be on. Okay. That's one image. And then if I turn on all the others, you can see it smoothing it out, particularly down here. You can see it smoothed it out, got the sort of white water type effect. So if you were near a waterfall or a rivulet, and you didn't have a tripod, you could use this effect to try and slow down the water. Um, and it's quite effective. It's quite effective. So once you've got the stack here, there's one more thing you can do. It's called a live stack. There's a little icon here right next to it, which might not be obvious. If I click on it, it gives you several ways of handling the stack of photos. It defaults to a median, which is taking a median of all the photos. You can do a mean, see it change slightly. And what I tend to find is you're never quite sure which one you're going to like the most. Um, like that's rubbish, outlier. But you've got maximum, minimum, and you can just go through these and find the one you like. 9 times out of 10, you'll either be happy with the median, which is the default, or the mean. Occasionally, you might want to pick another one. And there's others here, which to be honest, I've no idea what they're used for. I'm sure they're there for a reason. I just don't happen to know what they're for. So I'm going to go back to, I think maximum looked quite good. Mean, yeah, mean looked a bit, yeah, let's go for mean. So you can do all of that. And again, for the same reason for size, you've got all of these, 30 megabytes per image inside Affinity at the moment. When you're happy with that, I would just click on Merge Visible. You'll have a little think of it. And what it's doing is it's extracting all the data into one layer, which is that one. And once you've got that, hit the delete key and get rid of the stack. And that will reduce the size of the a photo file. And now you're, again, like with all the other techniques, you've now got your base image and you would go and edit and do all the things you would normally do. So, let's cut this down. Put that on a third. Nice bit of rock there. There we go. Much nicer. And do your normal type of edits. And off you go. So, let's just do something. Let's do levels. And bring that white in a bit. Give it a little bit more bounce to the photo. There we go. That's better. Less dull. And again, you might want to sharpen it for sharpening here, but obviously this you need to be a little bit more careful because you don't want to sharpen water drops. Hopefully, you just spent a lot of time trying to make it all fuzzy, for want of a better word. So that's it, really. So yeah, timing's about right. So we've covered new panorama, a new stack, which can be used for emulating long exposure, HDR for tone compression and making sure that your photos inside the dynamic range of the camera. Focus stacking, particularly for macro and for landscape when you've got a foreground interest in something off in the distance and you want both pin sharp. And that's it, really. So I'm going to call it a day on that. Hopefully you've all found that useful. You got but to try it, you've got to now go out and take some photos. So yeah, try and take some bracketed shots. try and take an image of a scene with various focal points that you want to have all in focus. Just try that. You can try that out on your kitchen table, to be honest. You could literally just get out a jar of jam and then another jar of jam, put that to the back, and then just focus on one, then focus on the other, take different shots, and then bring it in and see if you can get a single shot with everything in focus. And you can do that you can practice that from your kitchen table. Okay, hopefully that's enough for one evening, and I'll stop the recording now.